This sits in here. Must make sure it goes underneath the B lever. Picks the B lever up and lifts it. And tuck the spring in down inside the case. Make sure that's tucked in. And you can see how it lifts this lever. And this lever in turn releases the main cam. Which brings us to the main cam. I'll just run some molybdenum paste through the centre. Now the curved edge needs some molybdenum paste, and the two tabs where it picks up the blade actuating ring. But that's all. You don't need to cover it so that it looks like a huge blob of graphite grease, which is what the previous person had done. Lubricant only works where it's actually doing a job, preventing two mechanical components from abrading each other, not coating every other available surface. Right, that spring looks a bit tired to me. That looks a bit happier. Let's get that in place. I've lubricated that spring with a bit of molybdenum paste. Graphite grease could be used for that purpose. Let's get that spring seated in the bracket. Right, now the shutter. We should be able to cock this and it should fire. Yep. It fires. Okay, so that's good. Now I need to get my speed trains, my retard gear train and the self-timer, which have just been, I think they've just finished in the ultrasonic cleaner. Alright, let's get the retard gear train in position. Screw at this end serves as the pivot. And the speed adjustments are made by swinging the retard gear train in closer to the centre or further out to the outside. Closer to the centre engages it more with the main cam and slows the shutter up. Moving it further out to the outside engages it less with the main cam, which speeds the shutter up. Alright, let's see what happens. Well, that runs down nicely, that's good. I'm just going to run a wipe of molybdenum paste on this arm of that release lever so that as this comes round it latches into it smoothly, like that. Okay, so that's working. Now the self-timer, we'll get that in position. And its return, its screw is here. Whoops, drop that in there. It's held in with a single screw. Seems okay. Yep, I think that'll be fine. Okay, so those appear to work. I'll just give that a good blow out to make sure I've got rid of all the graphite powder from those speed trains. Okay, so a couple more pieces to go in here. I'll wipe some molybdenum paste around the inside and outside edge of that ring and hook that over its post here, stretch that into position. That's the self timer running down because this contacts the lever for the self timer. That's what activates it once it's ready to go. And little pinion that cocks the main spring from that ring goes in there. The speed settings cam plate, I'll just run some molybdenum paste around the inner edge and where the speed setting retard gear train contacts it, and I'm just checking the speeds. Well, that's too fast for an 8, so I've got to make an adjustment to that speed, and I'll do that now. Just take that off, get that out of the way. I need to slacken that screw off and move the speed cam in, the speed train in towards the centre for greater engagement with the cam, which will slow down the shutter. And get this back together and see what effect I've had. Get the timing right on this little gear. Put the plate back on. Right, it should be there. I think that's still slightly fast, but it's within close enough to be looking at it and testing it. I'm just going to check the self timer, set that. Self timer's running down. Listen to see what it sounds like. That was very smooth. That was good. And on the 1 second speed, yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, I'll loosely put the front retainer ring on that shutter, and I'll go away and test the speeds to see what they're like. I suspect it's a little bit fast, but I need to know by how much. Alright, back shortly. Yeah, probably about 1/3 of a stop fast. So I'll move that speed train inwards a little bit further and test it again. The movements are very subtle, so it's easy to overshoot. It's a bit like adjusting a rangefinder. If you think you might have moved it, you probably moved it too far. And that spring's rotated, so I can't get its end on the post easily. There it is. Now that's done it. Right. I'll put the plate back on the top and go back and test it again. Okay, speeds are good. So it means that can be closed up now pretty much. So the little lever here needs to go in place. Now this lever's job is to stop you being able to depress the shutter release unless the shutter's actually cocked, which saves you wasting film. You have to get the spring hooked behind its post and take that lever into position. Now the spring popped away. And I did it again. That spring might be a bit out of shape. No, it's fine now. Okay, let's put the cover back on. And I'll put the retainer ring on the front loosely and temporarily while I'm assembling all this into the case. Let's check that action again. Sounds good. So the shutter case, I'll need to clean this because it's probably oily. Everything to do with this shutter was oily, and that's not a good thing for this, because with these broad flat surfaces here, these components can create a lot of drag, which means that the shutter doesn't release as quickly as it should do. That looks okay. Just give these a light wipe with molybdenum paste. And put them in place. Now cock the shutter and fit the case in position. Now I should be able to rotate that around and the flash contact should slide into position. I think it did. I'll put the screws in place and test the flash to make sure that it was the case and that the contact hasn't just bent over or snapped off or done something else untoward. That little clamp screw, that had been over tightened too, it didn't need to be as tight as it had been previously. Okay, well, I'll test that with an electronic flash and see if it goes. I think I have a working example here somewhere. That I think is it. cock the shutter, connect up the flash, wait for the flash to charge. What have we got it set on? Let's give better speed than that, let's go something a bit quicker. Yep, that's good. That's all I needed to see. So the flash is working, there's nothing wrong with that connection. I'll clean up these other front rings and put them in place. Okay, I'll start assembling the front rings. Now the lower side of this ring, I'm wiping some molybdenum paste on there lightly. It fits down into this ring here. The pin on here drops into the fork on the aperture setting lever. These little notches here and here have to couple to here and here on the shutter speed settings cam plate. Like that. So all that's coupled together. You can take our front retaining ring off now because we'll be needing that off. This piece goes on, there's a little notch in the bottom of it, drops over a tab on that ring. And the front plate here has detents in here which give us our shutter speed clicks. And I'm just giving that a wipe of molybdenum paste. Put that in place, it only locates on one spot on the shutter. There's a post on the shutter mechanism plate that sticks up and it locates that front disc. Alright, so we'll just check the action. That's a little bit stiff, so I'll just loosen that ring off a little bit. And my aperture is not coupling properly here by the looks of it. That repeater is not connecting. Yeah, the tab has dropped out of the fork and the aperture setting there. See if I can stretch that back over. Now where are we? That's it. That's all good now. Okay, so far so good. I'll put the lock screw in that front ring, that retainer. That'll be fine. Okay, a bit more tidying up work to be done here. I need to get my retaining ring and these shims cleaned and free from the sticky oil, and then clean up the lenses. Well, that shutter is ready to go back on the camera. So I'll put its shims in place. I'll put the paper shim on the shutter first, and then the metal shim. That helps protect the paper shim while I'm getting the shutter in position on the camera. Otherwise it's vulnerable to being torn. Put that on the camera. I've wrapped the focus right out as close as it'll go. Lift that up, pull the rack across, the curved rack, and see if that engages and cocks the shutter. Didn't quite cock the shutter, so I will move that one tooth closer or further along. Try again. That time, success. I could just hear that shutter cocking before the film advance got to the end of the stroke. So I'll just check that that's the ideal spot by moving that one tooth further across. No, that's a good place. I can just tell because it's a bit stiff going the other way. That's good. Okay, so I'll put the retaining ring in place. And tighten that. Shutter's cocking nicely, and the slow speeds, let's test a nice slow speed here. 1 second, because it wouldn't do that when we started. That sounds good to me. We'll try the self timer. That sounds good too. Okay, right, so what I need to do is test to make sure the point in the stroke of the shutter release here, that the shutter fires and the film advance releases to allow you to wind on to the next shot at the same point. So I'm just depressing the shutter release very gently. I heard a click that allows me to wind on. That happened before I'd got to the point where the shutter fired. That means I need to wind the screw down on the top of the release lever slightly so that it releases later. So I'll just take these screws out of the top cover. And see if I can get that adjustment a bit better. Now I can get a fine screwdriver down here without having to take the meter off. So we'll give that half a turn, put the top back on and see what we get. Again, I'll squeeze it very gently and slowly. That's the shutter release, the film release unlocking, and I hadn't fired the shutter yet, so I need to take the screw down a little bit further again. That's still doing it. Still doing it. Didn't do it that time. It's right on the point. Needs a little bit more and no more. It was certainly releasing the film advance slightly before the shutter, but not much. That appears to be just right. So I will put the check underneath the top cover, make sure there's no dust or dirt or anything like that. No fingerprints that I've put anywhere. Put the top cover back down for the final time. 2 screws at this end of the top cover, chrome plated. One on the end of the top cover at this end. The rewind. That little bush goes on, and the rewind knob. Pull that right up, put something through the fork, tighten that. And that, I think it is. That's it for this camera. So there you go. Thanks for watching. This was one of my countdown cameras, and hopefully this time I really only do have 8 more to deal with.